and welcome to the Trade by Design system. If you're here for the first time, you might be wondering what exactly is the Trade by Design system. To put it simply, the trade collected that is outside of the norm of traditional technical analysis. Combining all of these things together has helped me create a system that allows me to be a lot more accurate with my trading than any other method that I've ever learned before. And now I'm passing that on to you. The Trade by Design system is a 5-part system. For everyone who has technical analysis education already, you may find that what you're about to learn is going to be a little mind-blowing. Just know that if you have favorite trading strategies that you use now, it's best to put everything you know now aside and approach this with an open mind. But don't worry, it's not gone forever. It just needs to go for now so that you can make the most of this course. We can potentially bring back those strategies later. However, the entire process is intended to test your thinking. So be open to the idea of learning a different way and simply set what you already know aside. Once you've mastered the system, you'll be able to choose which parts of what you've learned to bring back in. I guarantee you won't bring everything back in, but some things you may, because you may find that they still work with this strategy. The previous skills that you've learned, they're not wasted. You haven't been lied to, you haven't been duped. We'll make use of them, but we're going to make use of them in a very different way. So let me tell you what all the parts are before we deep dive into this course. Part 1 of the Trade by Design system involves exposing the market maker. And this is important because in order for you to trade, you need to understand who is on the other side of your trade trying to take your money. Those people know how you're taught to trade. And so if you don't know how they trade, then they will always have an edge over you. And this is why you will continue to lose money in the markets. So the most important part to start with is an understanding of who they are and how they're trying to take your money. In part 1, we will focus a lot on the 3-day swing trade setup, also known as the weekly setup. This setup involves typically a pretty high risk to reward, and it doesn't actually take a lot of time to be able to enter trades. Typically, you will get around about 2 trades per week per asset on this setup, and you will hold each one on average for about 3 days. If you pick the entry correctly and you take profit correctly, a trade like this will typically get you somewhere between about a 7-to-1 to even a 10-to-1 risk to reward. So it can be highly profitable without taking a lot of your time waiting for the setup, and that is why we start here, because generally people don't have a lot of time to dedicate towards trading, and this is the perfect setup for the majority of people. Part 1 also involves heat maps and liquidation data. Now, if you're brand new here, that might make no sense to you. But as we go through the course, I'm going to show you websites where we get to see where the market maker's orders are and where the big money is willing to commit to a trade. We can't see that on normal charts. And so that makes this kind of data an absolute game changer. Finally, we're going to go through astrology basics. Now, you might wonder how astrology has anything to do with trading, but there is a very famous saying by JP Morgan that goes, "Millionaires don't need astrology, but billionaires do." And if billionaires do, then we want to know why they take it so seriously also. So in part 1, we're going to go through the basics of astrology, being the moon cycle, and I'm going to show you how that can influence price action, combined with using our heat maps, our 3-day swing trade setup, and an understanding where the market maker is making their moves. This will all help us to identify the best pivot points to get the best entries on our trades. Part 2 of the Trade by Design system, which will follow after this course, is the day trade setup. Now, the day trade setup has a lot more trade entries and conditions than the 3-day swing trade setup does, so it actually takes a lot of time to master that one. There's probably about 10 or 12 different trade setups in the day trade setup, whereas with the 3-day swing trade setup, this one that we're learning now, the weekly setup, you really only have to look for 2 entry types. In addition to that, we're going to dive deeper into heat map trading and liquidation heat maps, and also dive deeper into astrology, including planets, houses, and signs. Part 3 involves a lot more intricate trading strategies that rely on mastering part 1 and part 2 before you attempt those. And these come in 2 completely opposite end timeframes. One of them involves scalp trading strategies. Now, scalp trading is trading very small timeframes, so you'll be in and out of the market sometimes in minutes, sometimes in an hour or 2 at most. We also cover market cycle trading, where you could be holding trades for potentially up to a year. So you'll likely find part 3 of the Trade by Design system to be a very diverse section of the entire system. We'll also get into on-chain analytics, and this will help us again to identify what the big money is doing when the charts don't show us that. Moving on from part 3, part 4 and 5 both come from the Invest by Design system. So they're not part of Trade by Design. They fall under Invest by Design, and that is part of the Capital Club membership. So if you're in first class only, you won't have access to part 4 and part 5. But if you are a Capital Club member, you will have access to my entire system of trading and investing. So let's get started with part 1 of the Trade by Design system. In today's lesson, we're going to go over some trading essentials that you absolutely have to be on top of before you even start to learn any trading strategies, and that involves understanding who the players are in the financial markets. As I mentioned earlier, you may have been taught to trade one way, but there are people who are trading against you who know the trades that you're going to take. And so if you don't know the way they play the game, then they have the upper hand. So we must know who's involved in making the decisions in the financial markets before we commit any of our money to it. We also need to identify who the market makers are. These are people that are on the opposite side of your trade. We need to know when they trade, what their trading zones are, the times that they trade, and we also need to know what they're focusing on. What are the most important elements for them? What are their limitations? What is their role in the market? All these sorts of things. And finally, to understand the difference between providing liquidity and being liquidity. And just in general, what even is liquidity? So let's start with who the financial players are.